Of the MFA in Film, Television, and Digital Media at the University of Georgia. He has written and directed 2 feature films. The drama Stay With Me, which we screened 2 years ago at this festival, it was released internationally by Freestyle Digital Media this year, and the romantic dramedy Rising Star, which is distributed by FilmRise. His producing credits include Chompy and the Girls, featuring Udo Kier, the Sundance 2020 world premiere web series The Ride, the 2016 Indie Spirit Award nominee Out of My Hand, and Being Michael Madsen, starring Michael Madsen, Virginia Madsen, David Carradine, and Lacey Chabert. His book is The Self-Sustaining Filmmaker, about crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, and community filmmaking. It was the top film TV book on Amazon the week of its release last June. He has taught film here in the state at UCA, which is why we will always claim him as an Arkansan, even though he has gone on to do other things. He left us for the University of Memphis and Quinnipiac University. He holds MFA degrees in film production from Florida State and in screenwriting from California State University at Northridge. He is a wealth of information and is going to talk to us all about his book and share some insight with filmmakers here about sort of some of the holistic filmmaking philosophy that is in his book. I read it last week, and it's full of super great information. So without further ado, Professor, you have the floor.
I want to kind of go over the main points of the book that I've written. This isn't going to be a really sort of detailed talk. It'll be a little bit more about sort of general concepts that I think can change the way that we make films, and more importantly, the way that we get them out to the world. That was the big thing that I was thinking about when I was writing this book. That first film that Carrie talked about, Rising Star, the book talks about this, I've had that film in distribution for over 10 years. I have yet to receive $1 from my distributor for it. And you know, it's almost, it's a hard thing to say, but if you have that level of honesty about it, you can look at things clearly and try to figure out a better way to do it. And that's where we are, and that's what I was thinking about when we wrote this book. There were 2 major kind of influences that I had when I was working on it. And the first one is over in Conway. Like Carrie said, I was a professor at UCA from 2019 to 2020. And as you can see here, I'm working with Professor Chris Churchill on a web series that we were able to start shooting in spring of 2020. I worked with the grad students there, and we had 7 episodes that we had written. We had shot 3 before the pandemic began, and we ended up finishing those 3 episodes and ended up putting them out into the world. The cool thing about that process was we were able to make 3 10-minute episodes, half an hour's worth of content, for $400. And it was literally just on food. So that made me think, okay, maybe there's a way to kind of corral resources and really make things sustainable so that this type of production is available to anybody. And then the other influence I had was a company that I worked for in California called Duplass Brothers Productions. You guys may have heard of them. They're 2 brothers, Mark and Jay Duplass. They're both writers, directors, producers, and actors. They have a show on HBO that just finished a 3-season run called Somebody Somewhere, and they make more independent movies than anybody. And their motto is make movies, not meetings. So really, they're very proactive. They're very, constantly trying to figure out new ways to make things, both in film and television. So they were really a big influence on how I was working, thinking about the book too. So what is self-sustaining filmmaking? I think of this question a lot. I don't know if you guys have ever heard this phrase. There's people who know how to build houses, and there's people who know how to sell real estate, right? There's a very separate skill set with both of those jobs. And a lot of times people can dedicate their lives to one or the other, and they have very successful careers. But in terms of being a filmmaker who can be self-sustaining, you need to be able to do both. And that's something that I think film schools haven't really caught on to yet, given the nature of how the world currently is in terms of film. But that's something that really puts the power in your hands. So the reason for that, and I'm kind of reviewing things I know you guys probably already know. The current system of indie film requires that you get accepted, that you get picked, right? So you can write an incredible script, someone will buy it. You get selected for a big grant or by a financier, someone gives you money and you can make something. You get into a big festival, they select you. I know Sundance has somewhere between 15 and 20,000 films that they get every year now, and they screen about 170 of them. So they're big odds against folks. And then if you get a distribution company involved, you have to get selected by them. So it's not really an entrepreneur-friendly type of system. The other thing that's working against you is that even if you do get picked, the financial prospects that you have are not the best, right? So you look at how streamers are now getting worldwide deals for films. That's taking away pre-sales that for a long time have been the bread and butter of independent filmmakers. They would sell rights to different countries, and in some cases, they'd be able to sell enough pre-sales where they could finance the film itself. That doesn't really happen much anymore. DVD sales are practically non-existent. Distributors don't give what are called minimum guarantees anymore. So if you sign a deal with a distributor, in the past, you would be guaranteed a certain amount of money up front that would get credited against sales of the film after it got out in the world. That doesn't really happen anymore. And then streamers don't really help with marketing. It's sort of like this big maw of content where you get placed on a streamer, but now you're one of 10 million films. So independent filmmakers really don't have advantages in the infrastructure that currently exists, right? So there's gotta be a new way. And that new way is what we're here to talk about and what the book that I wrote is about. So I've got 3 pillars that I think will be a new way to think about making and more importantly, or as importantly, distributing independent films. And I'm going to talk about each one in a little bit more detail, but I want to kind of go through them real quick here. The first one is called radical collaboration, right? And that's the idea of when you're making a film, collaboration is something that's sort of built into it, right? Whenever you work on a project, you know that you have to have folks working with you. You need to be thinking in terms of a team mentality to be able to make something. That's something everyone understands. What I'm saying is that you need to start thinking beyond that level of collaboration. You need to be thinking, every person who's involved in the making of my film or involved in providing a product or service that helps me make my film, how can I work with them to make my project more efficient, potentially more profitable? And those are things that filmmakers don't always think about. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Second thing is an entrepreneurial mindset. And that's a really big one. Film students generally come into film programs and they're focused on the creative and they're focused on the technical, which makes perfect sense, but business isn't really talked about as much. And in this new world, you need to be able to think about how you can get your film out into the world, get people to see it, and potentially figure out a way to make back the money that you spent on it. And we'll talk more about that in a minute too. And the third thing is called what I call holistic filmmaking. And this is kind of the idea that whatever phase of filmmaking you're in, you need to be thinking about every other phase in the life cycle of that film, and potentially more films after that, because that will give you the best chance to create an efficiently made, creatively controlled film that you can get out into the world and monetize on your own. So those are kind of the 3 pillars that I was thinking about when working on the book, right? So what does all this look like in the real world? Let's talk about radical collaboration. I had the first film that I made, Rising Star. We made that in Hartford, Connecticut. This was back in 2010. And when we were there was a location that we wanted to shoot at. You guys know what this is? What this place is?
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain House. Yes, that's it. So this was the home that Samuel Clemens lived in for most of his adult life. And the cool thing that I found out when I was getting ready to shoot Rising Star was that no one had ever filmed a movie in there before. So we thought, oh, this would be great. We could be the first ones to ever do it. So we went there and we talked with the head of the museum who oversees the house. And he said, yeah, we'd be open to that. You would just need to pay us $300 an hour. yeah, that wasn't gonna work. So we proposed something that was very unusual, but that we thought, well, let's give it a shot. We said, listen, we don't have that amount of money, right? We're an independent film, they never have any money. Why don't we do this? Why don't we pay you $50 an hour instead of $300? So now we're looking at a $300 fee to shoot there for 6 hours, which is about what we needed to get everything, that we wanted. And in exchange for that, when we have a rough cut of the film, we will be able to bring the film to you, and you can host a rough cut screening of the movie that you can sell tickets for. So now what we're doing is we're basically turning a location into a financial partner with us, right? So we get a really good rate to be able to get in there and shoot. And then once we have this rough cut screening, the Mark Twain House can utilize their mailing list, their connections, their media, and get people to come out to see the film. Well, if we had paid full freight to shoot in the Mark Twain House, it would have cost us $1,800. When we screened that film, the Mark Twain House made $2,500 in ticket sales. Everybody won. So that's what I mean by radical collaboration. Really thinking of the elements that you need for your film, not as items that need to be procured, but potential partners. I'll give another example here. I've got a film that I've been thinking about for a long time called The Winnie. And it's about a brother and sister whose mom passes away, and she tells them that they can't get their inheritance until they drive her Winnebago across the country to her internet boyfriend's house, at which point they'll be able to get it. So, silly comedy. But one of the things that I was thinking about when working on this, the idea of a road trip can create some interesting opportunities. So what I thought was, what if we shot this film in 8 different cities across the country? And if each one of the cities that we shoot in has a film festival, we partner with those film festivals to help produce the movie. They help us source local crews in each of the 8 different cities. And if they're really up for it, maybe they can help financially as well. So now we're thinking of a film festival not as just a place to play your film, but potentially a partner in the making of it. And that creates so much more excitement when there are local people involved in it. This is something that I've gotten a lot of interest from. The Jacksonville Film Festival is actually committed to be one of those 8 cities, and we're talking about an actual grant from them too, of a couple $1,000s. So if we're able to do that with a number of places around the country, film festivals might actually finance one of my next movies. So it's a very different way of thinking. The entrepreneurial mindset is the second of the two. And this is going to be kind of more of a traditional kind of lecture style thing. There's a number of things that you want to be thinking about when you're making your film that, as an artist, you may not immediately think of top of mind. So most filmmakers think like artists, as they should. They're storytellers. But they need to also think like people that are creating a small business, right? You may have heard that before. Every film sort of exists as its own small business. And that's a very important thing to think about. Film is really interesting. It's one of the only businesses that does not control the entire life cycle of its product, right? So if you're an independent filmmaker, you go through the process of making a film, and then you find a distributor to take that film on. You're handing over the biggest opportunity to make revenue from your project to another company. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, that's insane. So you really want to think about, how do I control the entire life cycle from the first spark of an idea to the last screening that it has? It's a long time, it's a lot of work, but if you do that, you have full control over the financial future of that film. You can also have the opportunity to create efficiencies in the production process, right? I'm as guilty of this as anybody. When I made Rising Star, I was sort of like zeroed in on, okay, I have to raise $100,000. I have to make that much. That's what will get the film made. What I should have done was think, okay, what are the things that I can get and that I can partner with people to get that will lower the ultimate cost of the film, that'll keep fewer people involved as investors, right? There's less pressure to make that money back if the number is lower. And then ultimately, then you start thinking, okay, is there a way that the actual production process can be changed to make things a little bit easier? I'm producing a feature film. I was actually in Rogers this past week working on it. And this is a film that we shot on an iPhone, right? So that definitely helped change the production process because it allowed us to move a lot faster. We didn't have a full camera package, right? There's trade-offs that come with it because an image on a phone is different than what you would get from a cinema camera, but it made things a lot easier in terms of schedule. So that's something that you want to be thinking about. And then finally, you want to identify chances to get your product in the hands of people who want it, right? And that's something that filmmakers just don't spend enough time doing. Thinking of who your audience is and how you can get them involved. So I think the best way to do this, and this is what a big part of the book is about, is crowdsourcing. You may have heard the term crowdfunding. We'll talk about that in a second. That's one type of crowdsourcing. But really, you can use what's called an open call to find almost any element of a film that you want to make. Right? So you can incorporate peer production into your filmmaking process by working with folks other than yourself, right? You can have a collaborative development and screenwriting process. I've got a film right now that I'm working on with two friends in North Carolina, and we've got basically like a wiki script that we're working on right now all together. People can jump in and change things and add things, add visual references, add audio references, and we're sort of creating the world of this film together. It's making things a lot more fun, and it's a lot less stuff I gotta write myself. Post-production and focus grouping, like I talked about with Mark House, that's definitely an opportunity to get folks involved. That can give you feedback on the film. They also could potentially become affiliate marketers of your film. One thing no one really thinks about is that every person who comes to see your film is potentially someone who could set up a screening of their own of your film. And then they can bring all of their friends and all of their family. And if you partner with them, now you're making money for not doing anything. It's the film equivalent of becoming a landlord. So it's something that can be a really big benefit. So you've got those elements there. The distribution of the finished film, obviously, is something that you can work an open call with to find folks who want to watch it. You can also use it for finding crew and cast members. If anybody's ever used Stage 32, that's a great opportunity for open calls backstage, places like that. Resource providers is also a really good, crowdsourcing is a great way to find them, whether you're talking about locations, again, like Mark House, production equipment. There's folks who maybe work in TV news who want to start working on film, and if they have a camera package, that's a deal that you can make where they work with you as the camera department. Food and craft service, there are tons of opportunities to get free food or discounted food, discounted craft service. People want to be involved in film, and that's an opportunity that you can use to get folks to work with you where you get something you need, and these people get an opportunity to do something fun. So there's also the most ubiquitous use of crowdsourcing, and this is what a lot of the book talks about, crowdfunding. So this is interesting. If you think about incorporating crowdfunding into your film, and you're thinking not just as an artist, but also as an entrepreneur, crowdfunding can give you a lot of tools that can help you with the life cycle of your film. It can help you understand who your audience is, and just as importantly, who your audience is not. It can capitalize on the best marketing channels for where you can get the word out about it. It can increase the value of the intellectual property that you're creating, and that's really important. So many filmmakers who take traditional distribution deals are not really thinking about the value of the intellectual property that they create. This film that I'm working on in Rogers, there's a lot of music in this film. So we're actually reaching out to Broadway producers to see if this film could be turned into a musical. That's not something we'd have access to if we went with the traditional distributor, because they would take all the rights. So these are things that you want to be thinking about. And of course, most importantly, in this model, you retain creative control. And as an artist, that's the ultimate goal. That's what you want. So I usually have a 90-minute presentation that I give about kind of the basics of crowdfunding. It's called Crowd Fundamentals. I'll kind of zip through kind of the major pieces of that here. Most important thing to think about, crowdfunding means a crowd. It does not mean your friends. So many students of mine come in and they say they want to run a crowdfunding campaign for their film and it's going to be great. And then when they start it, they reach out to all their family members. That's great if they can help you, but you want to be looking beyond that to try to find people who would have a specific interest in the content that you're creating. Right? And that basically involves 3 questions. Finding out who your audience is, where they are, both online and in real life, and how can you get their email addresses. When it comes to crowdfunding, email addresses are the coin of the realm. And this work might sound like marketing, it's because it is. Only in crowdfunding, there's the added element of getting folks to become contributors to something that you have not made yet. So for those 3 steps, the first thing is to really find your audience. Again, not family or friends. You want to look outside of your immediate social circle, and you want to take the burden of funding the film off of them. I remember when I was making Rising Star, my father had no idea what I was doing. And I was bugging him all during the campaign, we're gonna give money, you're gonna give money. And he just didn't get it. He was like, look, the film doesn't exist yet, why am I giving you money? Dad, well, because I'm your son, can you help? So ultimately he ended up giving money, but it was a little bit of a stressful conversation getting through to that. So you want to make sure that you're looking for folks that are outside of your immediate social circle and family circle. The film Chomping the Girls that Carrie mentioned before, this is a horror comedy that you can see on Tubi. It was actually ranked the #1 horror comedy that you haven't seen on Tubi by MovieWeb. That was pretty cool. For that project, we ran a crowdfunding campaign. We raised about $30,000 for it. We only had 25 backers, and they were all people the director knew. That's not the best way to do it. So what we should have done was do more research into fans of horror comedies, fans of just weird movies, that kind of thing, and find out where those folks are, and then try to work with them, and that could have made the campaign even more successful. That's in comparison to the last film that I directed, Stay With Me. We did a crowdfunding campaign for that in spring of 2020, actually a month after COVID started, and we were able to get about 154 backers to raise just over $14,000. So that's a lot lower of an average per backer. That means that we're doing the work, and we're trying to find folks, that have a vested interest in mental health, which is what the film is about, or drama, or a connection to Arkansas film. So all of those groups ended up helping us with Stay With Me, and that led to a much higher number of backers. You want to join 1 or 2 social platforms that fit your lifestyle. I'm sure everyone here has some kind of social media presence. You want to work on a platform that doesn't make you hate yourself. I didn't get on Instagram until about a year ago. I was a Twitter person forever. Now I'm a Blue Sky person because I don't know what Twitter is. But you want to make sure that you're on platforms that you enjoy. Go where your audience is, right? So this is interesting. If you're interested in making a science fiction film, the biggest audience on the internet is on the website Reddit. There's a subreddit that's over 2 million people. If you're making a sci-fi film, that's where you want to be, because that's where the people are that'll be interested in your stuff. And then you want to be planting seeds. You don't just want to be contacting people saying, please give me money, because that's a very common thing. You want to be creating conversations. You want to be creating relationships, because those are the people that will end up wanting to join your team when you ultimately run your campaign. And then the third step, you want to grow an authentic following. I don't know if you've heard of people buying followers on social media sites. That's the biggest waste of money you'll ever have. Even if you have a lower amount of people, if they're engaged, that's the most important thing. And then you want to learn about who they follow and who they listen to, because then you have an opportunity to make connections with them and potentially broaden out your audience even more. Partnerships, ambassadors, influencers can be big helps when you're running a crowdfunding campaign, and trusted entities within communities can help you connect with people that are there. So the film that I was working on in Rogers is a film called Uniball. You guys may have heard about it. It's been in production for a long time. And that film is about a young man who gets testicular cancer. Right? I won't tell you the rest of the story. Hopefully it comes out next year. But what we were able to do is we found 2 organizations that were specifically related to testicular cancer advocacy and testicular cancer research. We partnered with both of them. They both gave us $2,500 in the crowdfunding campaign, and they actually flew the director and his girlfriend, now wife, out to Las Vegas for their annual convention, where they were actually able to speak to a room full of testicular cancer survivors. That's the audience you want. We found another person in that audience who gave another $2,500. So that campaign raised almost $20,000 as a result of that, being able to connect with that audience. And then brands can also provide capital, services, products, reach. The first film I ever worked on was in Connecticut called A Little Bit of Lipstick. It was a romantic comedy starring Mia Tyler, Liz Tyler's half-sister, the daughter of lead singer of Aerosmith. Had Soupy Sales in it too. Tells you how long ago that was. We were working with a new drink company at the time called the South Beach Beverage Company. You may have heard Sobe, that's the name of the brand. At the time, they were a startup. They ended up getting acquired by Pepsi. But when we went to them, we said, look, we want to offer you an opportunity to be a part of the film. We can have our characters drinking the Sobe if you want. Would you be able to help us? And they said, well, we don't have any money, but we can give you some drinks. I said, all right, that's cool. So I showed up, expecting to get a couple cases or whatever. They brought me a pallet of 100 cases of drinks. Our crew didn't have to drink anything else for a month. So that's the kind of benefit that brands can bring you. If you're running a campaign, how much should you raise? You're always asking for what you need, not what you think you can get. That's a really important thing. You want to be able to make your film lean. You want to keep the number as low as possible so it's easier to reach. And you also want to know what you're going to be using the money for. A lot of people will run campaigns for films for production. So they'll raise money to hire crew, pay their cast, all that kind of thing. But that's not the only place where you can do it. I actually just worked on a campaign this spring at Georgia for a former student who wanted to write and direct her first feature film. We raised $10,000 for her for development. So that means she can hire a casting director, she can get script coverage, that kind of thing, and that's the very beginning of the process for her. Conversely, the Stay With Me campaign was actually a post-production campaign, so that money paid for picture editing, sound editing, music, color correction, and then film festivals. So knowing what you're raising what you're raising money for is a really important thing. As far as incentives, you want to make sure that any perk you have that's $10 to $25 is your key one, because statistically, that's the range where people are most likely to support a campaign. So you want to make sure that those perks are personal, visual, and shareable. I'll show you an example of that in a second. Delivery of your film really matters. For a long time, there were folks running campaigns where they didn't have access to the film as a perk. That's the reason people are going to back, because they want to see the work that you're doing. So you always want to make sure that's part of it. Humor always works. Self-deprecation always works. And one thing that's really important is to make sure that all of your perks can be delivered digitally. This is something I didn't really think about when we did the Rising Star campaign. You want to make sure that you can offer things that you don't have to manufacture and that you don't have to mail, because that eats into the money that you've made. So when we did the Rising Star campaign, we gave out special edition DVDs, which we then had to process and then we had to mail. Just so you guys know, I'm 6 feet 7 inches tall, and here's the receipt that we got from the post office. All of that is money that we no longer had. So it's really important that digital delivery be something you think about. I also want to share a really cool example of a visual perk at $25. My friend Dan, he's the co-founder of Slam Dance, and he made a film a couple of years ago called 18 and a Half. It was about the Nixon tapes. And this was his $25 perk. A picture of Elvis shaking hands with Richard Nixon, but instead of Elvis's face, it's mine. When I got that perk, I put it on every social media channel that I had, and I sent it to probably 20 different friends of mine. That means I'm now a cheerleader for that film. So that's what you want to be doing. Your pitch video, this is a really huge element of it. You don't want it to be more than 2 minutes. 90 seconds is ideal. The first 15 seconds of the film, you want to give a sense of what the story is that you're telling. So if you have a horror film, scare me. You have a comedy, make me laugh. Has to answer, why me as a filmmaker? Why does this film need to exist now? And why are you the audience that we need to have on board as part of the team to make this? If you can answer all those questions in a pitch video, you're in great shape. And the other thing that's really important is that the filmmaker needs to be in it somehow. I know a lot of folks may not be as excited about getting in front of the camera if they work behind the camera, but I think either your physical presence on video or your voice needs to be a part of it. There was a great campaign that ran a couple of years ago. There was a horror film called Skinamarink. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that film. There was a Seed and Spark campaign for that. And what happened was the filmmaker, we didn't see him in the video, but we heard him all the way through it. And he has this really monotone voice that's really creepy. And it worked perfectly with the images that he was showing that were very similar to what the film ultimately looked like. So you always want to make sure that you're a part of the pitch video, whether by picture or by audio. You want to plan your campaign in advance. This is a big thing folks forget about. You want to make sure that you've got an actual schedule that includes communication before, during, and after the campaign. You want to leave room for new elements. One great thing about campaigns is that you can sort of look at how things are happening and how things are being received. And if certain messages are working better than others, you can shift as the campaign goes on. And you also want to plan to learn from your crowd. As you get folks involved in a campaign once they're back, ask them questions. Why are you interested in this film? Do you know anyone else who might be? Get them involved and make them evangelizers. Direct outreach is a huge thing for campaigns. Again, getting email addresses is the most important sort of goal, not only for that campaign, but also for any other films you want to make in the future. You might be able to come back to them later on. Direct messaging is great. When we were doing the Stay With Me campaign, I sent out Facebook DMs to about 600 people, and we ended up getting probably 15 to 20 backers out of that. But more importantly, we had folks that were following the campaign. And Seed and Spark has a very interesting thing where if you follow a campaign, you don't have to pay anything. And if you get 500 followers, Seed and Spark gives you free film festival waivers. So that ended up being worth about $1,000, even though no one gave money for it. It showed that we had an audience. Partnerships that you have can help to get more outreach to folks. And then anywhere else you have access to people is really important. One of the cool things we did in Rising Star, when we were in pre-production, we would always meet at Panera Bread, and there were probably 7 or 8 of us. We would work at a table there, we'd have lunch or whatever. And then we had a sign that we put on the table that said, "Ask us about our independent film." Every time we were there, someone gave us money. And people would come up and ask questions, and oh, where are you shooting? When's it gonna happen? This is really cool. One guy gave us a $100 bill and said, "Best of luck to you." We wouldn't have done that. We couldn't have done that if we didn't let them know that that's what we were doing. So the more you get your kind of name and face out there into the world, the more likely it is that you can attract folks that can help. Backer updates are really important. They allow you to turn current supporters into amplifiers, right? So that whole idea of evangelizing. You want to make sure you have shareable visual content, pre-composed social media posts, and think of backer updates as an extension of your storytelling abilities. I had a campaign that I worked on that had like a little animated web series that ran through backer updates over the 4 weeks of the campaign, and it dealt with one of the minor characters in the film, and a lot of the backers really enjoyed that, and they ended up passing it around to other people and got some more contributions that way. Running the campaign, I don't have too much advice for running a crowdfunding campaign. It's one of those things where you kind of have to do it and experience it on your own. But make sure that you're communicating with people, you're reviewing messaging every day, you're creating opportunities for social media posts in real life. So if you're involved in pre-production, showing people what you're doing, visiting locations, meeting with actors, whatever it is. You always want to have an attitude of gratitude when folks are supporting you, and you always want to shine a light on others. Posting effective updates, You want to make sure you have clear messaging, always have a call to action. You want to demonstrate momentum every time you hit 10%, 20%, 30%. You always want to make sure you're letting people know, respond to the world around you. We had a big deal with that when we did the Stay With Me campaign because we started our campaign 4 weeks after the pandemic started. So we took the tack of art is extremely important in these times. We need support because everyone needs art right now. And that ended up being successful. We got some big people to help out with us as a result. So here's an example of an update that we have from Stay With Me. It's really simple, just a little graphic. We made it in Canva. I'm no graphic artist at all, but I made that and I can trick people to think that I am. And then we had a video talking about tips and tricks on how to deal with stress and poor mental health. So in that case, we're offering a service to the people that are backing. So that's something you always want to be thinking about. What can you give the audience? You also want to make sure you learn how to interpret your data. You can get information from crowdfunding portals that can give you clues as to where to focus your energy, right? You can see where traffic is coming from. If you get a lot of folks from one particular area, that might be the place that you want to spend more time. And does your campaign follow the bell curve? This is important. So you can see that dotted line. That's kind of the path of the average crowdfunding campaign. There's kind of a big boost in the first week. Weeks 2 and 3 it slows down, and then there's a boost again at the end to get to whatever your goal is. And you can see here, we more or less stayed to that. We jumped up a little bit right here. Whoops. We jumped up a little bit right here. That's because we got a $1,000 pledge. We jumped up here, we had another $1,000 pledge. And then here, we had a $3,000 pledge. And that was one that we were working on the whole month of the campaign to try to convince this woman to support us at that level. So thankfully, we got it before it was over. And then after the campaign's done, you want to deliver on all your promises. You want to keep communicating. One thing that a lot of filmmakers do is they sort of ghost their supporters after a film is done. You don't want to do that. With the Rising Star campaign, we ran it in 2010. We kept in contact with everybody until 2014. And that was the entire process of post-production, film festivals, and the ultimate distribution deal that we got. You want to make sure that you make the thing, and then deliver all the incentives that you promised. So this is an example of one of the Kickstarter updates that we had in 2014, I believe. Yeah, and this was when we made our distribution deal, and we have a listing of all the companies in Europe that the film was going to play in. And then we ultimately, if you see here, the top one of these countries is Malta. They actually called Rising Star their film of the week in their biggest newspaper in the country, and we were able to track that down, and we were able to send that out to everybody. And they all thought that it was cool. So people want to be engaged in the life of the project, and this is your opportunity to have them do it. So the third element here is holistic filmmaking. And this I think is the one that's going to take the most time to kind of wrap your head around. What you want to do is, like I said, whatever phase of filmmaking you're in, you want to make sure that you're thinking about every other phase when you're in that phase. That will make you think about opportunities that can help you further down the line. So when you're developing a story, that's really the point where you should be thinking about the entire life cycle of the film. Right? As you move forward, obviously there's going to be less and less opportunity for that, but the development phase is when you can not only think of your story, but how you can get other folks to help, how you can get other resources that you might not need to pay for, and you can be thinking about how the film's going to get distributed before you even start writing. So, and this is really important, because a lot of times, and I've done this many times, you write a story first, and then you find the elements to create it. In this model, you have to do the opposite. You have to sort of reverse engineer a story based on the elements that you have. So you can, building your story around the elements that you have access to, is obviously an important thing. If you have access to a farm, you don't want to make a movie that takes place on the moon, right? You also want to find the story in your community. One of the cool things about Rising Star The story was about an insurance adjuster who finds out that there's going to be layoffs this one weekend. He kind of freaks out, kind of tries to party his troubles away. And he meets this girl who is this total bohemian, total free spirit. And they spend this weekend together kind of having an argument over whether you should live to work or work to live. And one of the things I found out in the research of Hartford, Connecticut, was that the poet Wallace Stevens lived his adult life in Hartford and was buried there. He was a Pulitzer Prize winning poet who was also a vice president at the Hartford Insurance Company. He is the perfect example of combining work and passion. So his gravesite literally became the midpoint of my movie. That kind of research can come up with really interesting things. And of course, you want to consider genres, different topics of stories, characters, and locations who can attract niche audiences. That's a really important thing because niche audiences tend to be the most passionate. And those are the folks that you want working, in this indie film world. So, and then as you get to every other stage, you can be thinking, what can I do at this stage that can help us later on, right? So if you're in the writing process, would co-writing with a writer in another city help open you up to another market in the city where that writer lives? If that's true, you might have another place to distribute the film. And we can go all the way through the process here. In pre-production, while you're casting, would casting a local media personality help you with marketing once the film is done? Now, I know some filmmakers might say, that's not really the point of casting, that you want to find the best people for every role, and I agree with that, but there are other benefits that can come with this. For Rising Star, there was a longtime radio host in Hartford named Gary Craig, and he was also an actor. He had been on Curb Your Enthusiasm, and he was in the movie American Hustle, and he wanted to work more as an actor, so I had met him through a common friend, and I offered him a small part. One scene, probably took us 3 hours to do, but then we got another year's worth of promotion out of him because every time we played someplace, Gary would talk about it on the radio show. So those are things that can potentially help you later on in the process. When you actually get into production, can a location that you shoot at also potentially serve as a distribution venue? So Mark Twain House was obviously one of them for Rising Star, but we also shot at this place called the Connecticut Science Center, and they had a 200-seat IMAX theater. We had our Connecticut premiere in that theater, and it was the most beautiful the film ever looked. We also sold 400 tickets, for which we were able to keep half because we partnered with a film festival so that they could get the word out about it too. In post-production, can social media posts about what you're doing help get people excited about the movie's release? All of that work that you do for social media updates, that's marketing. That gets you ready for when the film gets released in the world. And then for distribution, you're sort of at the end of the process when you get to this point, but not really, because you can make another film after this. So when you're distributing the first one, can you create relationships that might help you with the next film that you're making? Right? So every time I make a film and it goes out and plays at festivals, I keep all the contact information of all the people at that festival. And so if I make a third feature film, I've got probably 35 to 40 festivals where I can immediately call people and say, hey, remember me? I had this short film play here a couple of years ago. Got a new film coming out. So that's thinking in terms of a longer tail, right, and a longer career. That's something that you definitely want to be thinking about. And then here's the last thing, right? I call this the loop of kindness. If you make one film, you can start the next one with everything that you've built from the first. And that's something that's so important. Because I know a lot of filmmakers, like, they put a lot of time and effort into making this one sort of culminating project that's the sort of pinnacle of their life's work. And I did that exact same thing with Rising Star. I didn't realize that all of those resources could be ported over to something else very quickly. Didn't help that I moved across the country, but I learned it anyway. That's something that's going to be a huge help for you because your audience isn't going anywhere. the resources that you have are still in place. And this is so true. If you're good to your community, they're going to be good to you. And this festival is a perfect example of that. The audience here in Arkansas for indie film is so supportive. I've been in this place probably 7 or 8 times to see independent films. There's a community here. They care. If you're making independent film here, you can work with them and bring them into your process. And hopefully, if you've got the idea of radical collaboration down, you think like an entrepreneur, and you work it with holistic filmmaking, you might be able to become a self-sustaining filmmaker. Thank you very much.
Marty, that's so great. Thank you so much. I would love to be able to open it up for questions, which I will do, but I've got a question of my own and I'm holding a microphone. So that's how that works. So here in Arkansas, like we are a state of 5 million people. We do have, a really robust and growing film community, and through the efforts of a lot of people, across the state, here in Central Arkansas, up in Northwest, a lot of people have been focused on, creating bridges and kind of unifying the film community. It's easy to do that in a state of 5 million people where we're all separated by 1 degree. But there also does tend to be sort of a mindset that is around there are really finite resources. There's kind of a scarcity mentality, like I have to carve out my little piece and there's not enough. Can you sort of speak to sort of how you make that shift?
Yeah, what you just said about a scarcity mentality, that's not at all unique to Arkansas. Every state, I've lived in 10 different states, and the film scenes in all of those states are very similar to that. With indie film, there's never a ton of resources, right? But if you think not from a scarcity mindset, but from an abundance mindset, that can help you be more open to potential opportunities that may not exist for anyone else, right? So no one had ever done that deal with the Mark Twain house, but they were so excited after that was done, they asked if we could screen again. And I said no, because we needed to make some money too. But that sort of abundance mindset will get you thinking, okay, well there's, if we have 10 locations, that's 10 opportunities that we might be able to get some other things, and really working with people. Another thing that's really important too is the idea that if you're gonna make something and you're gonna ask folks for help, it's so important that you return the favor. One thing that I'm really proud about Rising Star is that our crew was probably about 45 people, and since making that film, 8 of our crew members have made features, and I've helped every one of them. So that's something that I think is really important.
That's great. I would love to open the floor to any questions. Who's got a question for Marty? All right, yeah, sure, that will bring you the mic. You too can rock a mic. I'm gonna run back and forth. This was a mistake.
All right, so just one quick question. Of course, there's 1,000 questions. When you are crowdfunding or something like that, and you may know people that are, how you could say, wealthier, maybe have more resources.
Yep.
It would be smart to, when you're on your post, to say, hey, if you can't donate money, maybe you can donate time. Maybe that's pretty good. But if you know people that maybe are a little wealthier, do you think it would be a good use of time and money to say, hey, I know you're really, big in the community. Would you like to sit down, grab coffee or something like that, and I can tell you about my film, because it is easier to just do a Facebook post or do an email, but if you can sit down, if they have 30 questions, well, they can answer them. There's not this whole email back and forth. Do you think that would be good to do?
I think it's vital. Yeah, I think I'll.
Are you sure?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's vital. Being able to talk with high net worth individuals, if they exist within a community, that's a possibility for actual financial backing. That's an opportunity for working with the influence that they may have within the community. It potentially could be if those folks, make their money from a business that they have in town. That's the potential of being, of working with that business in some way. So yeah, absolutely. That is another common thing too with newer crowdfunders, is that they never get away from their computer. And it's kind of a bad thing, because being in the community and being visible increases the opportunity that you're going to get, folks come up to you and say, hey, listen, I made a film once when I was 18 years old, but then, I went in the military and I didn't do anything after that for 20 years. I would love to get back involved in it. That kind of stuff happens all the time. But you only find out about that if you're out in the community and you're actually meeting people. But specifically for those high net worth individuals, yeah, if you have access to them, creating a relationship with them, asking to sit down with them, you want to make sure you do your research about them beforehand, right? So you can find out, okay, if this person owns a brewery, for example, when you sit down with them, you can offer that brewery exposure by partnering with the film, by having the characters drink the beer that they make, right? That kind of thing. And that's how you want to be thinking. You want to be thinking in symbiotic relationships, because they have something to offer you, but if you have something to offer them, that's when the fun starts.
Thanks. Any other questions? So here's good news. So Marty's going to stick around for a little while. He is going to be out there by the Step and Repeat and where merch is and stuff. He's going to be signing copies of his book. You can chat him up. So I read this book. I did. I'm happy to say. I read it cover to cover. It goes so much deeper into some of the really, I think, practical, actionable. It's so actionable what he's recommending in the book, and he goes much, much deeper into those 3 pillars and all of the concepts. So if you are somebody who wants to do this and really is making this their vocation and wants to put their work more out there into the world, it's a must read. It's a good investment of your time and a little bit of cash, and Marty will sign it for you. Because come on. Join me in thanking Marty. Thank you so much.